Alright, I thought I might do a low temperature test, and this will also be a test to check that my logging is working as I intend it to be. So the thing has been sitting here on the table for about an hour, and it's just sort of acclimatized to the temperature of the room. And I have a second DS18B20 or whatever those things are there. So there's one there which I'm calling outside, and another one on there which I'm calling inside. And they have approximately the same temperature here, 28.3. Doesn't feel that warm in here, but I guess it is. Humidity is about 59 or so, and battery, this is a fully charged 3S battery, so it's just sitting on 12.56 at the moment. So those are the main numbers that I'm going to be looking at, and I'm just going to go and put it in the freezer for an hour or so, and then take it out and we'll have a look at the graph afterwards. Oh, I'm going to put it in a box here just so that it doesn't get any excessive moisture on it. And this is also kind of interesting because that means that we'll actually have different numbers for the outside and inside. So I'll put this one outside the box. And it's also interesting to see, because I've tried this before, and it's kind of interesting to see how the humidity changes a lot quicker than the temperature. Well, I'll just set it running for a while and then I'll show you what I mean. Okay, I've literally just come back from the other end of the house after putting it in the freezer, turned the camera on, and it's already dropped from 30 degrees approximately to -5 on the outside sensor. That's really fast, much faster than I was expecting. And the inside you can see is 30 degrees still. Now, like I say, this will go a lot slower because the air inside the container is not able to mix with the air outside the container. On the other hand, the humidity, what was it before, 58 or something? You can see it's already dropped to 47, and it's going a lot quicker. And I think this is because the walls of the container are actually able to contact the outside cold air, and it's the walls of the container getting cold and causing condensation to form on them that draws the moisture or the humidity out of the air. At least I think that's what's happening here. That's why this one goes so much quicker at the beginning than the inside temperature. See, it's barely dropped a couple of degrees. But I did this yesterday, just sort of off camera, and what's interesting is that after a while the humidity comes back up to approximately the same as what it was when I put it in. I'm not sure if that will happen today because the container is not completely sealed. Since I have that little wire sticking out the side, there's a little bit of a an air escape hole. Anyway, look at that, while I've been talking, down to -13 on the outside. Anyway, I'll let this run for about an hour and then look at the graph.
Here are the results of that test. The units on the horizontal axis are in log entries, which come in at about every 5 seconds or so. So this test was running for about 4 hours in total. Right at the beginning, it looked like one of the temperature sensors wasn't working properly, so you can see where I've touched it just briefly with my fingers to make it do something. Anyway, into the freezer they went, and you can see that the temperature's dropping at completely different rates there. This vertical bar here is actually some lost time because my tablet turned off. I can't get it to sleep. I can't get it to stay awake for more than 30 minutes without touching it. So for the rest of this test I had to just come back and keep touching it, and then after that I found an app in the App Store called Stay Alive, which you can get to make sure that the tablet doesn't turn off ever, which is exactly what I wanted for this. Anyway, you can see some fluctuations here when it's in the freezer. It's sort of going between about -15 and -21 or so. So when it gets too warm, like about here, the compressor will switch on and lower the temperature, and then it raises up again. I haven't quite figured out why there's a sort of a point at each side. Looks like a bit of a shark's tooth shape there, both at the top and the bottom. Actually, going from here upwards makes sense. It's sort of that curve there makes sense, but I don't know why it sort of juts downwards like this on the way down as well. It's a little bit weird. Anyway, at about this point I took it out of the freezer and I put it into the refrigerator section, and it's doing the same thing again, except between about 5 degrees and 0 degrees there. And then obviously I took it out and temperature sprang right back up again. So yeah, looks like everything's working alright, nothing too amazing. Okay, that should be right. Altitude 10 meters, that seems about right, doesn't it? Temperature 25, etc. Direction over there, yep. I'm going to put my goggles on now to see what my altitude is as I go up. Okay, so we're at about 140 meters according to this at least. Temperature has dropped by 3 degrees. I forgot to check what the humidity was before I took off, but seems to be working alright. I'm going to have to descend right now though because the battery's right on the edge, so that's the end of this test. And here are the results of that test, just comparing the altitude values from the GPS versus the two barometers. The only thing that's a little bit unusual about this is that the MS5611 value, the blue line, is sort of bouncing around all over the place. And I think this is just due to the fact that the little box that I was using to lift it up in wasn't very well sealed, and it's right underneath the hexacopter, which is blasting quite a lot of air downwards. The BMP 280 on the other hand is sandwiched in between the MS5611 and the main PCB, so it was a little bit more sheltered from air currents, I'm assuming. I didn't put any cotton wool around them or anything like that. That's anyway, the altitudes seem to match up pretty well, 140 meters up from 0 for the two barometers because they are measured from this relative starting point. The GPS though is measuring from above sea level, or actually it's above the ellipsoid, but sort of close enough. So that's why it's up sort of 110ish to begin with, and it goes up to there. But compared to each other, they're looking pretty similar. The next test I did was a duration test using the actual batteries that I was going to put on the balloon, and what I wanted to do here was just turn everything on, the cell phone, the video camera, the DVR and all that kind of stuff, and just see how long it would last. So I started off trying to do this with the 4S pack before I noticed that the overall voltage was just a little bit low. By the time the voltage regulators have taken their cut, the cell phone module basically was the problem. It wasn't going to run with this being the input to the voltage regulator. So I stepped up to a 6S, and I've just kind of soldered them together like that. These batteries, interestingly, when they're brand new, they're actually 1.8 volts, but almost immediately as soon as you start to use them, you connect something up, they drop right back down to about 1.5 straight away. And my voltage divider, I set that up so that I was using, I think it was a 10K and a 3K3 resistor, so that it could handle a fully charged 3S LiPo, which is what I was doing for most of my testing before I did this endurance test. So I just had to be careful not to connect up a 4S battery or anything like that, or else it would have been cooked.
Well, I've had this test running for almost an hour and a half now, and the battery has barely changed. It started at about 9.3 and it's sitting at around 9.15 or so at the moment. So for something that only needs to last an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours at the most in actual usage, it's going to last way longer than that. Admittedly, it's quite warm here. It's reading 28 degrees there. So it's not going to last that long if it's going up to higher altitudes where it's going to be colder. But still, it looks like it's easily going to last the 2 hours or so that it needs to. I was actually thinking that the cell phone module, if it was continuously running, which it is, that's why I put it up on the window to get better reception, just to make sure it was doing the GSM transmission all the time. I was thinking that would suck a lot of battery, but I guess not. It kind of makes sense because cell phones are doing that all day, and they have batteries that last pretty well. So I think what I might do is just stop it temporarily at this point, and I will actually attach this little DVR camera, FPV camera and the DVR recorder, because this does use about 2 watts of power, which I think will be more than all of the other stuff put together. But given that we have a fair amount of surplus energy, and I don't want this test to last forever, I will actually use this. I'm still not sure if I'll use it on the balloon, but I probably will now that I've seen this. The only problem is that it's an extra 13 grams to carry. Okay, in a rather annoying turn of events, I've discovered that when I plug in the camera and the DVR, the cell phone module stops working. It could be because of the voltage drop, so it's dropped from about 9.15 to 8.5, what does it say, 8.57. So it might be just something to do with not enough power being provided to the GSM module. Or it could be some radio interference, perhaps, that the DVR and the camera, one or the other, is setting up there, and it's just a little bit too noisy for the cell phone antenna to pick up the signal that it needs to. Either way, I'm pretty sure we're not going to be able to put that little DVR thing on the balloon while it's flying, which is a bit of a bummer. But I have confirmed it. I tried it about 4 times. You unplug the camera, everything's fine, you plug the camera in, and then it stops, guaranteed. Well, here's the answer to that question. I stuck the camera and the DVR on a separate battery, but still in sort of the same location, fairly close to the antenna, so that's the GSM antenna there. DVR is here, camera is here, so it's sort of about 40 centimeters away, and I lose the cell phone signal now. So the GSM module is not going to work with this little camera on board as well, which is a little bit of a pity, but that's okay.
And here are the results of that. Because this one took such a long time, I didn't really want to use my tablet to do the recording, so the data that we're looking at here came from the onboard SD card, which is why there's no funny bits or missing time periods or anything. And I also recorded, obviously, from my web server to see when the last message came in. And I forget exactly what the time was. I think it was just on 11 hours at this point here when all of the 3.3 volt stuff shut down. So that's way way more than enough to do a 2 hour or something like that balloon flight. And the GSM, or the last message that was sent to the web server, was a little bit before that. It was something like, I think it was just around 6 volts. When the battery voltage was 6 volts, the cell phone module stopped working at that point. So in either case, plenty long enough.
Alright, now that most of my testing is over, I've changed some of these connections from the plug-in DuPont plugs, or whatever they're called, and they're pretty much all soldered on now. So there's GPS, what is that, GSM, the NRF24, I also soldered that in as well. So this puts it at pretty much what's going to be the final weight for this section. So I'm just sort of weighing things here, and the parachute is 19 grams, batteries 47, and this bunch of things comes to 50, what was it, 56, so altogether that is 123. So that's the, oh actually no, that's not all of the payload, because I'm going to put this in a box now. So I'm going to use some of this XPS foam that I have left over from other projects. Unfortunately, it's kind of heavy when I weighed this. Now this is, I'll weigh these smaller pieces here so you can see what I mean. So these pieces are only that big, and they're already 16 grams, and that's nowhere near enough to make a box out of, but hopefully this piece will. Anyway, so I'll make a box now and see what the final weight is going to be with the box. So as the final step in the programming setup, I added a little bit of code to turn that buzzer off and on, off once and then off once during the main sort of loop. The reason I didn't do this earlier, obviously, is that it's really annoying. So that's the last step, and everything on there is now ready to go.
So at that point I had almost everything figured out, and I needed just one more thing to get this project off the ground, and that was some hydrogen. At least that's what I thought I would get at first, because when I looked at the prices of them, this is 1.25 cubic meters of hydrogen, which would be enough to do at least 2 launches of these little tiny balloons that I was using, possibly even 3, but it might be a bit of a stretch to do 3. And the cost for that was $45. And when you compare that to helium for approximately the same amount, a little bit, where is it? Well, it's the same size, but it's $140, so it's almost $100 more. They didn't list it here, but this one was apparently 1.3 cubic meters, so it's slightly more gas, but when you look at the price, it's way more in cost. So I thought I'll get some hydrogen, good. And I found that you had to order the hydrogen, and I guess they don't stock it that often. Whereas it turns out they had helium at the shop ready to go. I didn't know that. So at this point I started to feel a little bit out of my depth, because there was a lot of talk when I signed up for this website. It was all basically geared at industrial users, people who would come in and just buy a bunch of these to use at their welding shop or whatever. And they weren't really so geared for individual users, I thought. Anyway, so I went into the shop to pick this up when it arrived. They didn't mention the $50 delivery fee either, which was another thing that made me think that this was mainly geared towards industrial clients. Anyway, I raised some eyebrows when when I asked what I needed to screw into here to get the gas out. And to make a long story short, it turns out that the regulators for hydrogen are subject to some very stringent safety regulations, and they're bloody expensive. $600 to $700 I was told, and they didn't have any of those in stock because they are understandably a little bit rare. So they had assumed that I would have had one of those if I was asking for hydrogen. So anyway, what we ended up doing was going for the helium, and even though it costs more for the gas itself, the regulator for this was only $70. These are New Zealand dollars that I'm talking about here. So overall it was actually quite a bit cheaper, and it was a bit more of a basic regulator too. It didn't tell you what the pressure was or anything, but because I don't need to know that. I just need to get the gas out, like an on-off switch. And while I was there at the shop, the mention of using this for a weather balloon also raised some eyebrows, and they persuaded me to call the CAA just to check that hydrogen was okay, because they were sort of envisaging huge explosions in the sky because of hydrogen versus helium. And I forgot to mention to them that the Met Service is releasing 6 large weather balloons every day, using probably about a cubic meter, I would imagine, of gas each, and I really don't think they'd be using helium for that. That would have to be hydrogen, right? Does anybody know? I think it would be. Anyway, so I thought, well, it wouldn't be a bad idea to call the CAA, so I called them up, and they said they would, obviously hydrogen is not as preferable as helium with the flammable content, but there's nothing in the rules about it, and they didn't say it was a big deal. And I also asked just generally about the rules for releasing a small balloon like this, because my reading of CAA Part 101 says that there's practically no rules at all about balloons that are under 2 kilos payload. When you get above 2 kilos, that becomes a medium balloon, and then you're subject to a whole bunch of other stuff like NOTAMs and things like that, and you need to notify them when you're going to be releasing and where and all this stuff. But he confirmed that I was not subject to any of that stuff, although he did mention that they're not supposed to be giving advice like that. It's a little bit sneaky, really. It seems like they want to deliberately leave open the possibility to perhaps prosecute you if something goes wrong, and they don't want to say in advance that they're telling you that something would be a good idea to do. Because in the rules it says something like you've got to do this in such a way that it doesn't cause a risk to other people. But even that's very, very grey. So the whole thing just sort of leaves me a little bit uncomfortable about the lack of black and white clarity that are in the rules there. But anyway, so for those of you that were concerned that this was against the CAA rules or anything, I'm pretty damn sure it's not. Anyway, enough about that. This is the regulator that I got. Didn't really feel like spending $70, but it was much preferable to the $600 for hydrogen, and it's very easy to use. You just sort of push this to one side or another, and the gas comes out, and that's it. And on my way home I stopped in at Bunnings and I picked up some of these things. This is just some vinyl tubing and some of these things which are made to connect to other pipes, but I noticed that they had quite a wide selection of sizes, and I was able to make this fairly small pipe go up to something that would be large enough to squeeze over the end of this. And the reason why I wanted a small pipe is because some of this pipe is going to be hanging suspended beneath the balloon when you're setting up the right amount of gas that you need. So you don't want this to be very heavy.
Wow, that didn't take long. Is it enough to lift? Oh yeah.
Huh. Perfect.
So to attach the tube to the bottom of the cardboard tube, I just went berserk with electrical tape, and as I suspected that wasn't good enough because it was leaking like a sieve, so I just splotched a bunch of epoxy around there and it sealed it up, so I think that'll do for now. I don't want to make this too heavy obviously, because this has to be less than the payload weight, and well, with the payload weight plus this has to be less than the neck lift, if you know what I mean. So for the test that I'm doing tonight, I want to give it the same vertical ascent speed as I would have in my real run. And my real run is going to be 150 grams payload with 280 grams or so of neck lift. So that's 130 grams of actual lifting speed that will be contributing to the speed of ascent. So to do that with no payload, everything has to be 150 grams lighter. So what I want to fill this balloon so that it lifts 130 grams. And as it happens, this bunch of things here is 40 grams. So I'll just add a 100 gram weight to this, and when that starts to lift up, then I'll know I have 140 grams of lift.
Ooh, the neck is quite short. Oh no, I was hoping that I'd be able to fold this over. Like twist it around, fold it over. Oh dear, might not be able to do that. Oh, this is a lot smaller than the ones I've seen people using on YouTube and other videos and stuff. That's about all I can really do safely, I think. I kind of think I don't need a zip tie for this, but I'll put one on there anyway. This isn't going to take much. That's about 40 grams of lift there, just lifting the cardboard tube. So I want to make it a bit higher now. Just tipping this up. Wow, you can really control it quite precisely. Huh. Okay, so at this point, I want to put my 100 grams on and then fill it until it's lifting this now. Well, still got a way to go now. Okay. Just a tad more, there we go. Alright, so it's just lifting 140 grams. Ha, look at that. A little bit more. There might be a bit of a leak actually. It seems to come down after a while. Or is that just because I'm holding the hose? Whoa, hold on. Okay, so that there looks like it's in equilibrium quite nicely at the moment. Ha! So it's been sitting like this for 5 minutes or so now, and there doesn't seem to be any leaks, which is good. And it always just sort of returns to that same position just because of the tension in the hose, I guess. Anyway, that's the easy part. The tricky part now is to tie up this rather short section here somehow. Yep, this is proving to be quite tricky. I wonder if I can just do this. Don't really see what else I can do. I know zip ties are not ideal because in the cold they tend to become brittle and lose their grip. Another idea I had was to tie some wire around it and then tape over the ends to make sure it doesn't pop the balloon, this sharp bit there. I'm just thinking if it gets really, really cold and the teeth on the zip tie slip, then that's going to be it. Whereas if this was there, it might still hold together. I think I might put a little bit on there as well. Just have to be careful not to burst the balloon while I'm playing around with it here, eh? This seems quite risky actually, now that I'm doing it. I'm not going to launch this one. If I had have got this ready in daylight, I would have let it go just to, you know, see it fly. But now that it's dark, there's not really much point because I've kind of achieved my goal, which was just to do a practice run of tying everything up. And it's only going to be flying away and littering somebody else's farm, and can't even see it while it's flying up, so I'll just not do that. I think if I just bend it over like that and then put some electrical tape around the whole thing, I think it'll be alright.
Here's that other balloon that I didn't launch. I just left it stuck to the corner of the house there while I was away, and it looks like the sun, maybe the UV exposure has made that top side a little bit thinner perhaps, because it definitely wasn't like that a few hours ago.
Okay, it's the evening before the launch now, and I'm just doing some last checks on the weather and the prediction for where the balloon will land. It's been a couple of weeks, and I've just sort of been checking this balloon predictor thing every now and then. Haven't been on top of it most of the time really, but I just checked it a few days ago, and I saw such perfect conditions for tomorrow morning that it just had to be done tomorrow. By that I mean I can launch this from home. I can just stand outside my house and let it go. So I don't need to drive to a specific place and mess around by the side of the road trying to do all this stuff. I can do it in my garage and get it all ready, out of the wind. Well, there's not going to be any wind actually because it's such good conditions. But anyway, the landing site is going to be smack in the middle of this flat area that I wanted. Well, actually I kind of wanted this area here because there's not so much of that boggy, marshy area. I think this little bit here is sort of a boggy, marshy thing. Anyway, but this is very good still. It's nice and flat. And the burst point is going to be just on the other side of these mountains, so regardless of whether it goes down very fast or very slow, it shouldn't land in the mountains, and there's enough range on this side before it gets to other mountains over here. So I'm pretty sure it's going to land in a nice flat area of farmland, and the time will be 5 AM, so that's pretty good. It'll be light, and the landing time will be 7, so it'll be not such a terrible time perhaps to be knocking on someone's door, at least not a farmer's door because they wake up pretty early most of the time. But on top of that, if we look at this location where it's predicted to land, it's close to a road, and if we look just a few hundred meters over here, what's this? A Vodafone cell tower. So everything is lining up pretty good if it gets anywhere near this area. Of course, I'm not expecting it to get exactly near there, but as far as targets go, this is really, really good. So I'm really happy about that. Here's the Vodafone cell towers around that area. So you can see in all this flat area, they don't actually have that many because I guess the ones that are over on the sides are enough to cover it because there's no line of sight obstructions. But it just so happens that there's one right there on the point where I'm trying to get to. In order to get it to do that, the target altitude for the burst is going to be 17.5 kilometers, which means that the with a payload of 150 and that balloon and that altitude target, the neck lift needs to be 280 grams. Ascent rate's going to be 3.72. Oh, maybe I should. I put 3.5 in here, but I mean, I'll try that a little bit later. But it's probably going to be pretty close either ways. But I can twiddle these numbers a little bit to get it as close as I can to that cell tower location anyway. So time to burst is going to be 78 minutes, and it's going to be about a third of a cubic meter, or 0.4, closer to 0.4 cubic meters. So with my 1.3 cubic meters of helium, I might even be able to get away with 3 launches like this. Definitely 2 would be possible anyway. And what was I going to say? Oh, the time. So the total time of flight is looking at, it's going to be 2 hours. And this is roughly an hour and a half drive for me to get to this location, I think, if I don't dawdle. So, yeah, everything is just lining up so perfectly. I'm really, really happy about the situation, and I'm just going to go to bed now and hope I don't sleep in or anything like that. And if I don't sleep in, it's on.